We're learning more today about George Wendt's final days. The beloved Cheers actor was struggling with major health issues.
According to his family, George Wendt died peacefully in his sleep here at his home in Los Angeles. The 76-year-old was in failing health, suffering from kidney issues.
Afternoon, everybody.
Oh, no! How's life treating you, Norm?
He caught me in bed with his wife.
Listen, promise you'll hold me to one beer tonight, okay?
One at a time?
For the whole night.
Norman?
What's up, Norm?
My nipples. It's freezing out there.
George Wendt isn't the man the world thought he was. For decades, he was beloved as Norm from Cheers, the lovable bar regular who brought warmth and laughter into millions of homes. But behind the scenes, George carried a story he rarely spoke of, a shocking truth far more complex than his on-screen persona. Before he died, he finally broke his silence about Cheers, and what he revealed has left fans stunned. What did George Wendt confess about his time on set? Join us as we uncover the unbelievable truth behind the laughter. The passing of a legend. The world woke up to a wave of disbelief. George Wendt, beloved for his warm eyes, easy nature, and unforgettable role as Norm Peterson on Cheers, was gone. No, not gone from the theater. He had passed away in his sleep quietly on May 20th, 2025. The news almost broke the internet, and fans everywhere were stunned by the silence that had replaced his ever-familiar greeting. His death was confirmed by his manager, Jeff Chetty, who did not specify a cause. For years, he was the man everyone recognized by a single name, Norm. But behind the camera, behind the jokes and barstool banter, George Wendt had been fighting a battle no one fully saw coming. To the world, he was always the jolly, beer-loving regular who never missed a single episode of Cheers. But as time passed, George Wendt was waging a slower, more personal fight. In 2012, he was hospitalized with severe chest pains. Doctors quickly determined he needed coronary bypass surgery. The procedure was successful, but the message was clear. Time was catching up with him. From then on, Wendt's public appearances grew rarer. He was occasionally spotted using a cane. George dealt with a range of complications, some linked to weight and age, others more private. There were talks of breathing issues and joint pain, exacerbated by years on set under hot lights and long hours. George characteristically cracked jokes about getting old rather than giving illness the attention it demanded. But behind those jokes were hospital visits, physical therapy sessions, and long, slow recoveries. He tried to make public appearances when he could, conventions, charity events, small cameos, but those moments grew fewer. Privately, the iconic actor fought on. His final months were quiet, surrounded by family, close friends, and the echoes of a career that changed television history. And when the end came, it was peaceful. But the ripple it caused was anything but. For millions who had watched Cheers and loved him like an old friend, it felt like losing someone they knew. But before he died, George opened up about his biggest show, Cheers, and unveiled the man behind that iconic character. The same but different. Norm Peterson, played by George Wendt on Cheers, quickly became one of television's most memorable and beloved characters. On the surface, Norm was the easygoing bar regular who was always ready with a quick joke, a hearty laugh, and a cold beer. His laid-back personality made him the ultimate regular at the Cheers bar, where everyone knew his name and cheered his arrival like a local hero. On Cheers, Norm had endless rounds of beer, and his easy charm made him a symbol of comfort, friendship, and humor. He was the kind of guy you could always count on for a laugh or a sympathetic ear, the bar's unofficial mascot who seemed to fit right in with the night crowd. But while Norm's character seemed straightforward, there are questions. Did George drink so much? Was he the same on and off screen? Undoubtedly, one of the most famous things about George's Norm Peterson on Cheers was his love for beer. Not just a little love, but a lot. Norm seemed to drink beer all the time. If someone had tried to count every single beer Norm had on the show, it would surely add up to hundreds. And remember, that's just the beers he drank during each short 22-minute episode. Of course, Norm is a made-up character, so he wasn't drinking those beers when the cameras stopped rolling. But still, it made a big impression. George Wendt, the actor who played Norm, has clarified that he enjoyed beer in real life, but not as much as Norm did on the show. George wasn't drinking beer during filming. That's normal, because actors are not supposed to drink absolute alcohol on set, even if their character does. If they did, they might forget their lines or mess up the scene. What George was drinking was a very different kind of beer. He once said, "It tasted pretty bad." The producers wanted the beer to look fresh from the bar's tap, so they couldn't use bottles or cans. Instead, they took fake beer, made from cans, and poured it through soda dispensers to make it look real. But here's the catch. This fake beer was prepared long before filming began. So by the time George got the beer from the tap during a scene, it was already flat. All the bubbles had disappeared. The props team added salt to make it look like real beer with a foamy top. So George was drinking flat, salty, fake beer during those long hours of shooting. He joked that his best acting wasn't just pretending to be Norm, but pretending that the awful beer tasted good. Even though the beer on set was terrible, George Wendt is a true beer fan. He loves beer so much that he wrote a whole book about it. The book, Drinking with George, A Barstool Professional's Guide to Beer, came out in 2010. In it, George shares his funny and interesting stories about beer over the years. Some of his stories could easily be scenes from a sitcom like Cheers. For example, he talks about his first taste of beer as a child, just a little sip from his grandpa's cup. He also tells a wild story about performing in a drunken act with Woody Harrelson and the U.S. women's synchronized swimming team. In addition to stories, the book answers common questions beer lovers might have, like how to tell different kinds of beer apart, or how to chill a warm beer quickly. It's a fun read for anyone who enjoys beer or likes a good laugh. Another difference between George and Norm is how they handle drinking. George admits that when he drinks beer, he does get drunk, like most people would. But if you watched Cheers, you might notice that Norm never seemed drunk, no matter how many beers he had. That was on purpose. The network didn't want Norm to appear drunk because they wanted him to stay a fun, likable character. If Norm seemed drunk, audiences might start feeling sorry for him, which would change how people saw the show. So even though Norm looked like he could drink all day and never get affected, George Wendt was careful to keep things professional and realistic behind the scenes. He was acting as Norm, but wasn't living the character's lifestyle. He gave his best to the sitcom, one of the biggest in history. The show has won and been nominated for various awards, including 13 Emmy Award nominations for its first season alone, the most nominations a comedy series had ever received at that time. The show went on to receive a total of 197 Primetime Emmy nominations, winning a total of 28 throughout its 11 seasons. When asked about the differences between himself and Norm, Wendt is always quick to point out that, unlike Norm, he's a big fan of his wife. It was a running gag on Cheers that Norm wasn't a massive fan of his wife Vera, who we never actually see or hear from in the show. But Wendt has been happily married and enjoys spending time with his real-life wife, Bernadette. He also likes to point out that when he drinks beer, he gets drunk, kind of like every other normal person. He says this because, As you may have noticed, Norm never seems to be intoxicated in the least on the show. He drinks beer after beer, but keeps the same sober personality going throughout. Wendt says this is because the network never wanted Norm to appear drunk. They felt like this would turn him from a fun and popular character to one for whom audiences felt sad. And that wouldn't serve the show very well. But what happens when the world can't separate the actor from the role? The blessing and burden of typecasting. Although George Wendt was a household name, it was not necessarily his name that went viral. To millions, he was simply Norm. While most actors dream of creating such an unforgettable character, it also comes with a strange curse. No matter what role he takes next, people cannot stop seeing Norm. Typecasting is undeniably a genuine hurdle in Hollywood. When an actor becomes too closely associated with one role, especially a wildly popular one, it can limit the following opportunities. For George, the shadow of Norm was long and very stubborn. Casting directors, audiences, and his peers couldn't easily separate the two. He found that many of his post-Cheers appearances still leaned into the same familiar persona: funny, lovable, beer-loving guy with a joke ready to go. Trying to break the mold, George took roles in films and TV shows that strayed from the barstool comfort zone. He voiced animated characters, did guest spots on shows like Frasier, Columbo, and The Simpsons, and even hosted his short-lived sitcom, The George Wendt Show. But none of those projects ever matched the success of Cheers. And if you think it's just professional, then you're mistaken. George once mentioned that he couldn't walk into a bar without someone shouting "Norm" from across the room. Sometimes it was endearing, like fans genuinely thrilled to see their favorite TV regular. Other times, however, it reminded him that the world didn't know George. They only knew Norm. Despite that, George never publicly resented the role. He embraced the affection fans had for Norm. He understood that the character gave people comfort. Norm was like a couch. They knew where he'd be, what he'd say, and that he'd never judge. For many, that familiarity went beyond entertainment. It was therapeutic. Still, as time passed, Wendt wanted people to see he was an actor with range. He performed on stage in other productions, earning critical praise and proving he had depth beyond the sitcom world. He found the freedom to stretch as a performer in the theater, away from beer mugs and punchlines. But the Norm persona was quite sticky. Even in interviews years later, journalists often circled back to Cheers. It wasn't uncommon for interviews to open with "So Norm" instead of "So George." He joked about it and laughed off, but underneath was a reality familiar to many TV icons. It's hard to move forward when the world keeps looking back. Interestingly, Wendt's wife, Bernadette Burkett, who voiced the unseen Vera on Cheers, often reminded him of his real-life identity. Their long marriage and family life grounded him in ways Hollywood couldn't. She understood both the pride and frustration that came with his career. In their private lives, George wasn't Norm. He was a father, a husband, and a guy who enjoyed barbecuing, politics, and spending quiet time with family. Not necessarily holding court at a fictional Boston bar. But aside from the popular sitcom, what was his professional life like? Life after Cheers. After his legendary run as Norm Peterson on Cheers, George Wendt found himself at a crossroads similar to many television stars who become synonymous with a single role. While the sitcom had given him immense popularity and 6 consecutive Emmy nominations, it also left a mark that proved both a blessing and a burden. One of his first major post-Cheers ventures was The George Wendt Show in 1995. Hopes were high. The sitcom cast George as a talk radio host in Chicago, offering a character that shared some traits with Norm, but was more grounded in real-life responsibilities. The show failed to resonate with broader audiences despite some curiosity from loyal Cheers fans. Critics immediately found the writing flat, the premise uninspired, and the ratings low. NBC canceled the show after just 8 episodes. For George, the cancellation was a blow, showing how difficult it could be to break free from the shadow of a beloved character. Rather than retreat, he shifted his focus to guest appearances and supporting roles, where the expectations were lower but the opportunities more varied. Television remained his mainstay throughout the late 1990s and 2000s. He made memorable guest appearances in various shows, including Frasier, Becker, Modern Family, and Portlandia. In most of these appearances, he played characters that leaned into his everyman charm, a blend of warmth, sarcasm, and quiet wit. Although these roles didn't elevate him to new heights, they kept him visible and working. In film, Wendt had a few notable supporting roles. He appeared in Fletch in 1985, Gung Ho in 1986, and Forever Young in 1992, often playing side characters who added humor or groundedness to the story. He rarely, if ever, played the lead, and though his performances were solid, he was often relegated to secondary or comedic roles that didn't allow for much character development. His appearance in Man of the House alongside Chevy Chase and Jonathan Taylor Thomas in 1995 was a more prominent role. Still, again, the film didn't achieve critical or commercial success. Hollywood seemed content to use George for his familiarity rather than test his range. One of the more successful shifts in his career came in the theater world. He returned to his roots in live performance, where he could exercise more creative control and break away from typecasting. He performed on Broadway in Art and took on the iconic role of Edna Turnblad in a national tour of Hairspray. These performances were met with strong reviews, showcasing his ability to carry roles with physical comedy, musical timing, and emotional nuance. At least on stage, George was able to breathe new life into his career, away from the confines of TV typecasting. A memorable part of George's career was his association with Saturday Night Live, especially in the now iconic Da Bears sketches. Portraying a stereotypical Chicago sports fan, he leaned into his real-life Chicago roots and helped create a recurring bit that became part of pop culture lore. While it wasn't a full-time gig, it reinforced his persona as the ultimate American everyman. George Wendt never replicated Cheers' massive success, but he didn't need to. He maintained a long, respectable career built on humor, humility, and consistency. Though Hollywood never fully let him break free from the Norm Peterson character, George carved out a space where he could still shine. Before the applause, the Emmy nominations, and the iconic bar stool on Cheers, George Wendt's path to stardom was anything but glamorous. The humble rise to stardom, born in Chicago on October 17, 1948, George grew up in a blue-collar Irish-American household. His father worked as a real estate agent, and his mother was a Navy veteran and homemaker. They were a devout Catholic family, and George was one of 9 children. Life in a bustling household taught him resilience and humor early on, which would serve him well in the unpredictable world of show business. Despite his comedic instincts, the young boy struggled academically. He enrolled at the University of Notre Dame, but didn't last long there. He was expelled during his junior year for poor grades. Wendt later quipped that his GPA was 0.0. Embarrassed but undeterred, he picked up the pieces and transferred to Rockhurst College in Kansas City, where he completed a degree in economics. Yet a conventional career never called out to him. After college, he drifted. He worked odd jobs, most notably cleaning toilets at Chicago's legendary comedy institution, the Second City. Most aspiring actors dreamed of performing on that stage. Wendt scrubbed it. But the backstage work gave him a front-row seat to live improv, and planted the seed of ambition that gave rise to who he would become. Eventually, he auditioned for the Second City's training program and was accepted. This decision changed his life. Wendt found his rhythm. His deadpan delivery, unassuming presence, and sharp wit stood out. Though he wasn't flashy, he was unforgettable. While his peers chased Hollywood deals, Wendt quietly and progressively built his craft. He spent years performing in small venues, often for little or no pay. The stage became his classroom. He honed the timing and subtle comedic sensibility that would later define Norm Peterson. Then came 1982. He was cast as George, the fat guy at the bar, in a new NBC sitcom about a Boston pub. The name soon changed to Norm, and the character expanded after his first reading. What was meant to be a walk-on role became a permanent seat at the bar and in American pop culture. George Wendt didn't explode onto the screen. He arrived steadily, humbly, and with years of practice. He wasn't a child star or the product of elite drama schools. He was a janitor, an expelled student, and an improv comic with calloused hands and a stubborn spirit. And that's what made Norm Peterson work. Wendt infused him with authenticity because he knew what working for a place at the table meant. He knew what it felt like to be overlooked and underestimated and to slowly, patiently earn recognition. It's no wonder millions felt like Norm was one of them. Sadly, George Wendt, the legendary Norm Peterson, passed away quietly in his sleep at his home in Los Angeles on May 20th, 2025, 32 years to the day the Cheers finale aired. Even though he's no longer with us, his memory lives on. He inspired a generation of comedians and actors, and that impact is not to be easily forgotten. What do you think about George Wendt and the shocking news of his demise? Let's know in the comments. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more amazing videos. Also, click on the next video on your screen. You will enjoy it.